Equilibrium. Impressions of dynamism are conveyed in a fundamentally different manner from that which conveys impressions of stasis. Mathematical dynamics pertain to systems in motion, such as the flows of fluids in open channels. Mathematical statics pertain to systems in which movement is to be resisted, such as structural mechanics. This distinction is entirely absent from the considerable portion of economic science that ignores the inherent dynamism of its subject matter. Here we find covert presumptions that a steady state has arrived and is being held in place by general optimality. Where merely hypothetical steady states are presented as actual, it is reasoned that, insofar as optimality does not prevail, there would be unrealized profits to be had in bringing it about. The means by which such profits might be realized are then quietly passed over as fit subjects for discussion, and economics' inclination toward static mathematics receives its justification. But any static view is limited in that it only asserts that the forces upholding an economic state have achieved balance. It allows us to suppose whatever we will about what forces are opposed in that balance, how their prior imbalances maneuvered the system into its current state, when the steady state was achieved, or most anything else likely to satisfy our curiosity about causality in material affairs. When economic states are portrayed in a succession of freestanding points in time, with each isolated in its local equilibrium, the very notion of time must be completely bastardized. The system has been dynamicized, time has been impounded, but the time involved is fake time, fictitious time. It is a logical time, not a historical time. What comes first is equilibrium and process is secondary. We move between one equilibrium position of the economy and another, but there is no rhyme or reason to the transition, and no arrow of time. So far so good, but then we are asked to accept that some notion of equilibrium, or at least a temporary balance of forces, seems sine qua non of rational inquiry. But rational inquiry observes no points in either time or space, only intervals and volumes. Thus there is no where for economic equilibrium to exist. In all of the otherwise infinite variety of nature, there has never been an enduring steady state, nor, for that matter, a straight line. Such counter-phenomena exist only in the thinking of economists. And even then, economics' tacit constructions of steady states as static are overdrawn. In reality, states are only steady through operations such as those by which a cyclist remains upright, that is, by constantly correcting towards some abstract ideal, such as verticality. Emulations of the process by which a steady state maintains itself establish an abstract system's connection to objective reality in ways that deductions from static equilibrium cannot. SF Econ is, with certain pointed exceptions, a participant in the Neoclassical school, and this has precipitated some stirring exchanges with heterodox economists. Christian Arnsperger and Yanis Varoufakis, to take one informative instance, have argued at considerable length that neoclassical economists, together with our Austrian cousins, defend our oeuvre by refusing to have it defined. In one oft-cited paper, Arnsperger and Varoufakis propose 3 meta-axioms with which to particularize neoclassical theory, maintaining that, if economics mainstream ever admits to definition by these axioms, it would have no option other than a stand-up fight to the finish with heterodoxy. These prospective meta-axioms are individualism, instrumentalism, and equilibration. Passing over promiscuous usage of the word axiom for now, we offer the following translations of these expressions from econ speak into more familiar English. Individualism sources economic causality in a spontaneous tendency for marginal revenues to approach marginal costs. The individual referenced here is homo economicus, a figurative human being who applies perfect knowledge and flawless reason to a singular quest for the highest personal well-being. Simply put, individualism presumes that the economy operates closely enough to its optimum for the drawing of useful inferences. Instrumentalism refers to the constraints imposed upon Homo economicus by his production or utility function. And equilibration is the hallucination of economic behaviors that eventuate in general equilibrium. Arnsperger and Varoufakis proceed by asserting an internal contradiction among their three axioms. While the first two meta-axioms allow for rich descriptions of socioeconomic phenomena, they lead to an unquenchable indeterminacy. This critical finding is justified by, but only by, the admittedly powerful authority of Hugo Sonnenschein. Neoclassicism cannot demonstrate that equilibrium would emerge as a natural consequence of agents' instrumentally rational choices. So if individualism and instrumentalism cannot abide together in any mathematically stable dynamic system, it only follows logically that neoclassicism cannot complete itself other than by imposing successive statics upon its representations of economic activity. Such an imposition, being arbitrary, contra-scientific, and impossible to demonstrate, Arnsperger and Varoufakis have seemingly vanquished their intellectual adversaries. That is until Professor Sonnenschein is contradicted by objective demonstrations that neoclassical causality and boundary conditions have, in any number of instances, cooperated in guiding representations of economic activity from chaos to stable equilibria. SF Econ's prototypes engage each of the three axioms set out by Arnsperger and Varoufakis, and require nothing more in terms of theoretical structure. These models avail themselves of those rich depictions of socioeconomic phenomena that Arnsperger and Varoufakis find conveyed through the notion of profit maximization under the constraints of production and utility functions. And our fundamental SF Econ Model 0 is always subsiding toward general equilibrium, while its utility parameters are kept constant. These matters being observed in visibly stable, operative mathematical systems, we offer to engage with Arnsperger and Varoufakis on the aforementioned ground of whether their three axioms are in any way axiomatic. Individualism, the basis for alleging that marginal costs will spontaneously align with marginal revenues, is adequately described as nothing more than the motive force animating SF Econ's prototypes. And instrumentalism simply forms the boundary conditions within which our models operate. Moving on to equilibration, here we can be entirely definite in finding that its description as axiomatic is completely misplaced. Equilibrium is a behavior and not, therefore, a viable element of theory. If equilibrium is to become genuinely manifest, it must be allowed to emerge naturally in the course of a proper dynamic model's operations. It cannot, therefore, be sensibly used to compel, determine, specify, or dictate what a dynamic emulation does. The more appropriate application of the word axiomatic in these matters would assert that imposing equilibrium among the causal elements of any mathematical representation of dynamism is something that invariably causes unquenchable indeterminacy. And this will be the result irrespective of any causal system's subject matter, motivating principles, or boundary conditions. As demonstrated by the stable, goal-seeking behaviors of SF Econ Model 0, individualism and instrumentalism provide an entirely sufficient theoretical structure for the control of objectively functioning and mathematically complete representations of economic activity. All of our fundamental depictions of economic motion amble about quite gracefully on just two of the appendages connected with heterodoxy's three-legged neoclassical strawman. SF Econ's particular synthesis of individualism with instrumentalism demonstrates, contra Professor Sonnenschein, that equilibrium does emerge as a natural consequence of agents' instrumentally rational choices. While it is accurately and fairly observed that neoclassical economists do impose equilibrium on their models to the end of making them dynamically inert, we must also observe that these practices are accepted well beyond the neoclassical campus. Equilibration is, then, a habitual and unfortunate recourse within economic science, not a diktat flowing from references to individualism or instrumentalism. Given the relentless dynamics of our subject, economists' habitual presentation of their science in terms of successive statics will always prohibit operable expressions of economic activity. Valid ideas about economic causation must, at some point, convey our subject's dynamics, which can only interact with equilibrium references to create a self-contradictory system. While these simple matters can always be made more complicated through the arts of academic exhibition, such performances will never justify heterodoxy's throwing of the marginalist baby out with the equilibrium bathwater.